My name is Lydia, and looking back now, from the quiet comfort of a life I never thought possible, it seems almost absurd. It's a story about how the simple act of drawing flowers, an innocent girl's only solace, became tangled in the deadly machinery of war between England and France. It's the story of how my trust was so profoundly betrayed that it nearly sent me to the gallows, and how the very man sent to ensure my destruction, a man whose heart was a fortress of cynicism and steel, became the one who risked everything to tear it all down. He intended to use me as a pawn in his shadowed world of secrets and lies, but he was undone by the simple truth of a wildflower. Before I dive into the story of how a spymaster's cold calculations were thawed by a naive country girl, I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you've ever felt like your kindness was mistaken for weakness, go ahead and hit that like button. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for stories about finding strength in the most unexpected places. My world, for the first 19 years of my life, was small and green. It was contained by the stone walls of my guardian's estate, a place called Willow Creek Manor, nestled deep in the rolling hills of the English countryside. After my parents were taken in a sudden carriage accident when I was just a child, their dear friend, Mr. Richard Elliot, had taken me in. He was a quiet, scholarly man, with fingers always faintly smudged with ink or soil, and a library that smelled of old paper and leather. He had been my father's closest confidant, and in my young mind he was a pillar of stability in a world that had crumbled. He gave me a home, he saw to my education, and he asked for nothing in return except for me to be a quiet, well-behaved ward. I lived in a state of profound, unspoken gratitude, a debt I felt I could never truly repay. My days were a gentle, repeating pattern. I would tend to the gardens, losing myself in the riot of color and the hum of bees. I learned the names of every flower, not from books, but from sitting with them, sketching their petals and leaves until I knew them by heart. This was my one true talent, my one private joy. The house was often silent, as Mr. Elliot spent most of his time in his study, poring over maps and thick, ancient-looking tomes. He would emerge for meals, pat my head with a distracted air, and ask if I had been practicing my letters. "A lady's mind, Lydia," he often said, his voice dry as rustling leaves, "should be as orderly as her garden." I tried so hard to be orderly, to be the ward he would be proud of, but I was also lonely. The staff were kind but professional. The nearby village was a long walk away, and we rarely had visitors. My only companions were my sketchbook and the silent, listening faces of the pansies and foxgloves. One crisp autumn evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the polished floors, Mr. Elliot called me into his study. This was unusual. His study was his sanctuary, and I was rarely invited past the threshold. The room was dominated by a huge oak desk, buried under a chaos of papers, and the air was thick with the scent of his pipe tobacco. He was smiling, a rare, thin smile that didn't quite reach his pale gray eyes. "Lydia, my dear," he began, steepling his long fingers, "I have a small project for you, a task that requires your unique artistic gift." My heart gave a little flutter of pride. He so rarely acknowledged my drawing. He gestured to a stack of beautiful, heavy cream-colored paper and a set of new, fine-tipped ink pens. "I have a correspondent in London, a fellow scholar from France by the name of Monsieur Dubois. We share a passion for botany, and he has expressed a great desire to see examples of our fine English flora. My own hand is too unsteady for such delicate work." He paused, his gaze intense. "I was hoping you would consent to make some copies for him, replications of some of the plates from my botanical encyclopedias. It would be a great service to me." I could only nod, my throat tight with a mixture of excitement and a desperate eagerness to please him. To be useful, to finally contribute something of value, was all I had ever wanted. The task became my entire world. Each week, Mr. Elliot would provide me with a print of a flower, often an exotic one I'd never seen in our gardens, and I would spend days replicating it. He was exacting in his standards. "Pay attention to the veins on the leaf, Lydia," he'd murmur, peering over my shoulder. "Count the petals precisely. The exact number is of the utmost importance for scientific accuracy." Or, "The curve of this stem, my dear, it must be just so." Our Monsieur Dubois is a man of great precision. I took his instructions as the gospel of a dedicated academic. I didn't question why a French botanist would need such perfect, hand-drawn copies when the books themselves existed. I didn't wonder why the flowers he chose were often strange hybrids with an unnatural number of leaves or oddly patterned root systems. I was simply the instrument of his scholarly passion, and the praise he showered upon me was a balm to my lonely soul. "Exquisite, Lydia," he would say, holding my finished drawing up to the light. "You have your mother's eye for detail. You are a good girl." And for me, those words were worth more than gold. I would carefully package the drawing in a special oilcloth wrapper he provided, and he would send it off to London with his weekly courier. I felt a quiet thrill, imagining this mysterious French scholar marveling at my work, a small connection to a world far beyond my garden walls. I had no idea that each line I drew, each petal I counted, was a character in a secret alphabet, spelling out the names of ships, the locations of troops, and the timetables of military deployments. I was, with my innocent ink and paper, committing treason. In the smoky, wood-paneled offices of Whitehall, my name was spoken for the first time, not with affection, but with cold suspicion. Major Archibald Thorne stood before a large map of the English coastline, a half-empty glass of brandy in his hand, his expression one of weary disdain. He was a man forged in the crucible of espionage, where trust was a liability, and every human interaction was a transaction of information. He had seen the worst of men, and it had carved away any belief he might have had in their better natures. His superior, Colonel Harding, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the worries of the nation, tapped a pen into the map near a coastal town. "The leaks are getting worse, Thorne. We lost 2 supply ships last month. The French knew their exact route. The source isn't in London. It's not in our ranks. All our intelligence points to a new channel, something unconventional." Archibald took a slow sip of his brandy. "Define unconventional," Harding sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The information is being passed through artistic renderings, botanical illustrations of all things. We intercepted a courier, but the man knew nothing. He just picks up packages from a country estate, Willow Creek Manor, and delivers them to a French national in London, a suspected agent named Dubois." Archibald raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something almost like amusement in his cold eyes. "Botanical illustrations," Harding nodded grimly. "The codes are brilliant, embedded in the petal counts, the leaf patterns, the very composition. They're being drawn by a young woman, a ward of the estate's owner, Richard Elliot. Her name is Lydia March." Archibald let out a short, humorless laugh. A milkmaid passing state secrets. How wonderfully pastoral. She must be a cunning operative to have stayed hidden this long. "Perhaps," the colonel said, "or perhaps she's just a girl. We need you to find out. Go there. Your cover is an artist, a painter of landscapes. Get close to her, seduce her if you must, turn her, find out who her handler is, how deep the network goes. I want the entire cell, Thorne, and I want it shut down. The girl, she's a means to an end, a piece on the board. Use her. And when you are done, we will discard her with the rest of them." Archibald finished his brandy in one swallow, the fire of it doing nothing to warm the ice in his veins. A naive country girl, a lovelorn artist. It was a role he had played a dozen times before. It was easy. People were so predictable in their desires, so easy to manipulate. He would go to this Willow Creek, find this treacherous farm girl spy, and dismantle her little network with brutal efficiency. The thought of her fate, a quick trial, a short drop from the gallows, didn't stir him in the slightest. It was simply the cost of doing business, the price of treason. His first encounter with me was a meticulously planned accident. He had learned my routines, my favorite paths for walking, the secluded meadow where I liked to sketch. He set up his easel on a rise overlooking the meadow, a canvas of bland, half-finished hills before him, and waited. He saw me long before I saw him. He watched me approach, a basket of wildflowers in one hand, my sketchbook in the other. He had prepared himself for a woman of sharp, assessing eyes, a woman whose rustic charm was a carefully constructed mask. He was ready for the game. What he was not ready for was me. I was humming softly to myself, my face turned up to the sun, a picture of such guileless contentment that it was for a moment disarming. When I finally noticed him, I startled, a hand flying to my chest. He saw not cunning, but genuine shyness in my wide blue eyes. He deployed his well-practiced smile. "Forgive me for startling you. I was lost in my work." He gestured to his canvas. "I'm a painter, seeking the sublime in the English countryside." I took a hesitant step closer, my eyes on his painting, then on his face. He saw my gaze was open, curious, and utterly devoid of suspicion. "Oh," I said softly, "it's very nice." He knew it was a terrible painting. It was meant to be. It was part of the cover. "You're too kind," he said, his voice a smooth, charming baritone. "And you? Are you an artist as well?" I clutched my sketchbook tighter, a faint blush rising on my cheeks. "Oh no, not a real artist. I like to draw the flowers." He feigned immense interest, asking to see my work. He expected technical skill, perhaps, but with a coldness, a hidden purpose. Hesitantly, I opened the book. He saw page after page of wild flowers, rendered with a delicate, loving precision that spoke not of espionage, but of pure devotion. He saw a drawing of a common daisy, and I began to speak, my shyness melting away as I talked about my subject. "Did you know that the name comes from day's eye?" I explained, my voice animated. "Because the petals open at dawn and close at dusk. It's like it's sleeping." He listened, his charming smile fixed in place, but behind it his mind was reeling. This was not an act. He was an expert in deception, and he knew it when he saw it. This girl's innocence was a palpable force, as real and as natural as the sunlight warming the meadow. It was so absolute, so complete, that it felt more alien to him than the most elaborate ruse. His entire strategy was predicated on her being a willing, cunning participant. If she wasn't, then what was she? The thought was a discordant note in the cold, clear symphony of his logic. It irritated him. He ended the conversation smoothly, expressing a hope that they might meet again, that he could see more of her wonderful work. As I walked away, he watched me go, a profound sense of confusion warring with his professional certainty. He had come to find a spy, a traitor hidden behind a pretty face. Instead, he had found a girl who talked to flowers. For the first time in a very long time, Major Archibald Thorne felt a sliver of doubt. The mission, he told himself, was unchanged. But the pawn on the board had a face now, and it was unexpectedly, unnervingly innocent. He began to orchestrate more of these chance encounters. He would appear along the riverbank, where I gathered smooth stones, or near the ancient oak tree where I read. He maintained his guise as the slightly melancholy artist, a man searching for beauty to soothe a troubled soul. And I, who had never known the attention of a man my own age, let alone one so worldly and handsome, was an open book to him. We fell into a strange, gentle routine. He would ask about my life at the manor, and I would describe my quiet days, my fondness for the garden, my deep respect for Mr. Elliot. Archibald listened, his mind a cold engine of analysis, filtering every word for clues, for inconsistencies. But there were none. My stories were simple, my feelings genuine. The more he listened, the more a disturbing picture began to form. I spoke of Mr. Elliot as my savior, my benefactor, yet there was no real warmth in my descriptions. He was a figure of authority I was desperate to please, not a beloved family member. I was profoundly isolated, starved for connection and approval. He was supposed to be exploiting this very vulnerability, yet he found himself feeling a grim sort of anger towards the unseen guardian who had cultivated it so deliberately. In return, I would ask him about his life, about the places he had seen. He would craft careful lies, stories of travels in Italy and Spain, weaving in just enough truth to make them feel real. To his own astonishment, he found himself describing the actual colors of a Tuscan sunset, the real scent of orange groves in Seville. He was drawing on his own memories, things he hadn't thought of in years, and sharing them with me. One afternoon, as we sat by a babbling brook, he told me I had a smudge of charcoal on my cheek. Without thinking, he reached out and gently brushed it away with his thumb. My breath hitched, and my eyes widened. The brief touch was electric, a moment of unexpected intimacy that startled us both. He pulled his hand back as if burned, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. He was furious with himself. That was not part of the plan. Contact was a risk. Emotion was a fatal error. He was the operator, I was the target. And yet, The feel of my soft skin under his thumb lingered, a ghost of warmth that he could not dismiss. He was beginning to hate this assignment. The clean lines of his mission were blurring into a messy, complicated portrait he no longer understood. The breakthrough he needed came with an invitation. I, in my innocence, told him how much Mr. Elliot admired art and suggested he might enjoy seeing Archibald's portfolio. It was the perfect pretext. Archibald accepted with practiced grace, his heart thumping with the cold thrill of a predator closing in. He arrived at Willow Creek Manor the next afternoon, a portfolio of his deliberately mediocre landscapes under his arm. Mr. Elliot received him with a cool, scholarly politeness. He appraised Archibald's work with a critical eye, offering faint, condescending praise. "A commendable effort," he said, his tone suggesting the opposite. "But the soul of the landscape, my dear sir, is in its details." Throughout the stilted conversation, Archibald watched him. He saw the way Elliot's eyes would flick towards me, a quick, assessing glance that held no affection, only calculation. He saw the way I watched Elliot, my expression anxious, waiting for a sign of approval. It was the look of a well-trained dog hoping for a scrap from the master's table. My guardian's cruelty wasn't in harsh words or actions. It was in the subtle, pervasive withholding of love, making me perpetually strive to earn it. Then Elliot made his mistake. Wanting to show off my dutiful talent, he asked me to fetch the botanical drawing I was currently working on for Monsieur Dubois. I returned with the drawing board, my cheeks flushed with a mixture of pride and nervousness, and placed it on the stand. It was a depiction of an orchid, one with an impossibly complex pattern on its petals, and a stem that twisted in a distinctly unnatural way. I began explaining the technical challenges, the special ink Mr. Elliot insisted I use, but Archibald wasn't listening to me. He was looking at the drawing. To my untrained eye, it was a beautiful flower. To his, it was a page screaming with information. The number of spots on one petal corresponded to a map grid. The specific, unnatural twist of the stem indicated a date. The unusual color of the ink, he suspected, would react to a chemical to reveal troop numbers. It was sophisticated, it was brilliant, and it was utterly damning. And as he looked at this intricate piece of treason, then looked at my earnest, proud face, the final, terrible piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The colonel was wrong. I wasn't a spy. I wasn't even a willing accomplice. I was a brush in a traitor's hand, a living, breathing, unknowing cipher, a tool to be used and discarded. And the man who had turned me into that tool was standing right there, smiling his thin, proprietary smile. A cold, black rage, unlike anything Archibald had felt in years, settled in his chest. His mission had just changed. It was no longer about dismantling a network. It was about saving the innocent girl at its center. His next communication with Colonel Harding was fraught with tension. From a secure line in a dreary coaching inn miles away, Archibald made his report. The guardian, Richard Elliot, is the handler. The girl is clean. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Harding's voice, sharp and incredulous. "Clean? Major, your job is to provide intelligence, not character assessments. We have her drawings. That's all the proof a military tribunal will need." "Sir," Archibald pressed, his voice low and tight, "she has no idea what she's doing. She thinks she's copying plates for a botanist. Elliot is exploiting her talent and her trust. She is a victim here. Every traitor has a sob story, Thorne," Harding shot back, his impatience palpable. "Your orders stand. Use her. Feed Dubois false information through her next drawing. We'll let the exchange happen, and we'll take them all. The girl included. Her fate is not your concern. Are we clear?" The line went dead. Archibald stood in the dim, stale room, the receiver still in his hand. "Her fate is not your concern." The words echoed in his mind, a direct order that felt like a moral poison. The protocol was clear, logical, and ruthless. They would allow me to draw one last flower, a beautiful lie crafted by British intelligence. They would let me hand it to my guardian, who would pass it to the French, and then the trap would spring. They would arrest Elliot, Dubois, and me. I would be tried as a spy. My innocence would be no defense against the tangible proof of my own drawings. The gallows did not make exceptions for ignorance. The thought of my face, confused and terrified, as they placed the rope around my neck, was a visceral, sickening image. He thought of our conversations in the meadow, of my simple joy in the wildflowers, of the way I'd looked at him with such open, unguarded trust. He, who had built his career on the art of betrayal, was being asked to commit the most profound betrayal of all, to sacrifice a truly good person for the sake of strategic advantage. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the moonlit road, wrestling with the ghost of the man he used to be and the stranger he was becoming. His duty was to his country, his oath was to his king. But what was his duty to a single, innocent life? He began to make small, rebellious gestures of care. He left a parcel for me with the village baker, containing a set of expensive sable brushes and a rare lapis lazuli pigment he'd acquired in his travels. He attached a simple note, "For a true artist." He knew it was a foolish, sentimental risk, a breach of his cover, but he couldn't stop himself. He was no longer just observing his target. He was trying to give her something beautiful before the darkness he was bringing descended upon her. The end game was approaching faster than he could control. Intelligence reported that the French network was preparing for a major move, a final critical piece of information. The full disposition of the Channel Fleet was being requested, and Monsieur Dubois, growing wary of couriers, would be coming to collect it himself. Archibald knew this would be the exchange Harding was waiting for. This would be the trap. His time was up. He had to find a way to warn me, to get me out before it was too late. He found me in our meadow, putting the finishing touches on a sketch of a robin. He sat beside me, his demeanor unusually somber. He couldn't tell me the truth, not without revealing himself and compromising the entire operation. So he tried to speak to me in a parable. "Lydia," he began, his voice quiet, "I once knew an artist, a woman who painted beautiful portraits. A wealthy patron commissioned her to paint his family, and he paid her handsomely. But what she didn't know was that the patron was a forger. He used her masterful portraits, her style, her signature, to sell fake paintings to museums. When he was caught, they accused her of being his accomplice. They didn't believe she was innocent." He watched my face, searching for any flicker of understanding, any dawning of suspicion about my own situation, but my expression was one of pure, heartbreaking sympathy. "Oh, Archibald," I whispered, my eyes filled with compassion for this imaginary woman. "That's a terrible story. How dreadful for her. I hope she was able to forgive the man who betrayed her so completely. Forgiveness is the only way to heal a wound like that, isn't it?" Her response was a dagger in his heart. My innocence was not a shield he could pierce. It was a fortress impenetrable to his dark, cynical world. I could not conceive of the kind of calculated evil that Mr. Elliot was perpetrating, the kind of deception that Archibald himself practiced every day. My instinct was not to suspect, but to forgive. He looked at me, sitting there in the sunlight, talking of forgiveness while unknowingly sketching out my own death warrant. And he knew. He could not warn me. He could not use me. He could only do one thing. He would have to break everything: his orders, his career, his oath, to save me. He stood up abruptly. "I have to go," he said, his voice strained. He walked away without another word, leaving me alone and confused in the meadow. He was not just walking away from me. He was walking towards an act of treason, his own personal rebellion, born not of politics or ideology, but of the stubborn, undeniable goodness of one naive country girl. The night of the exchange was cold and moonless, the air thick with the salty tang of the sea. The location was a remote, windswept inn on the coast called the Smuggler's Rest, a place known for its discretion. Archibald's team, a dozen of the king's best men, were already in position, hidden in the dunes and the shadowed stable yards, waiting for his signal. Colonel Harding's final orders had been delivered by a rider that afternoon, the message's crisp finality chilling Archibald to the bone. "Allow the package to change hands. We want Dubois with the evidence in his possession. The girl is an acceptable loss. Do not interfere, Major. Do not fail." Archibald stood on a cliff overlooking the inn, the wind whipping at his greatcoat. He could see the faint lantern light in one of the private parlors. He knew I was in there with Elliot. He knew that in my hands I held my final masterpiece, a beautiful, intricate drawing of a sea holly, its spiny leaves and clustered blossoms spelling out the doom of the Channel Fleet. And in his pocket he held the counterintelligence, the false drawing he was supposed to have given me, the one that would have sealed my fate as a traitor. He had never delivered it. He looked at the lights of the inn, then back towards the darkness where his men were waiting. His whole life, his entire career, had been a study in obedience, in following the cold logic of the greater good. But looking at that light, he could no longer see the logic. He saw only my face, my trusting eyes. He made his choice. It wasn't even a conscious decision anymore. It was an imperative, a force that moved him against all reason. He turned his back on his men, on his mission, on his entire life, and began to walk quickly, silently, towards the inn. This was more than insubordination. In the eyes of his country, it was treason. He was risking his own neck to save the girl he had been sent to condemn. He was no longer a spymaster. He was just a man, running out of time. He didn't bother with subterfuge. He walked through the front door of the inn, his face set like stone, ignoring the innkeeper's startled protest. He went straight to the private parlor and threw the door open without knocking. The scene inside was exactly as he had pictured it. I was standing by the fire, looking nervous and out of place. Mr. Elliot was at a small table, carefully rolling my drawing of the sea holly and preparing to place it into a protective leather tube. He looked up, his expression of annoyance shifting instantly to one of alarm as he saw Archibald. "You," Elliot hissed. "The artist. What is the meaning of this intrusion?" "Lydia," Archibald said, his voice calm and clear, his eyes locked on mine. "The man you're with is a traitor. He has been using you. Your drawings are not for a botanist, they are coded messages for the French." I stared at him, my mind unable to process the words. It was as if he were speaking a foreign language. I looked from his grim, urgent face to Mr. Elliot, my guardian, who was now pale with fury. "Lydia, don't listen to this madman," Elliot snapped, his veneer of kindness vanishing completely. "He's trying to confuse you." "The game is over, Elliot," Archibald said, taking a step into the room. "I am Major Archibald Thorne of His Majesty's Intelligence. You are under arrest for treason." That was when the carefully constructed world of my life shattered into a million pieces. Major? Intelligence? Treason? The words were meaningless sounds. All I saw was that the kind artist was gone, replaced by a hard, dangerous stranger, and my guardian was looking at me with eyes I had never seen before. Eyes filled with pure, cold hatred. Elliot moved faster than I could have imagined. He lunged across the table, not for Archibald, but for me. He grabbed my arm, twisting it painfully behind my back, and pulled me in front of him, a human shield. "You foolish, sentimental girl." He spat in my ear, his breath foul. "Did you really think your childish scribbles were for the sake of art?" At that moment, the parlor door opened again. A man stood there, elegantly dressed, with a charming smile that did not reach his predatory eyes. He held a small, silver-plated pistol, aimed steadily at Archibald's chest. "It seems we have an uninvited guest, Richard," the man said with a French accent. "Monsieur Dubois," Archibald acknowledged, his body tensing, but his voice remaining steady. The pieces were all on the board: the traitor, the spy, the pawn, and the rogue agent. Dubois was a pragmatist, a businessman of secrets. "Major Thorne," he said, his smile widening slightly. "An unexpected pleasure. I have heard of your work. I simply want the information I came for. Give me the tube, Richard, and we can conclude our business. The major can be dealt with." Elliot, still holding me tight, hesitated. He saw his escape slipping away. "He'll have us all arrested the moment you have it. He is one man," Dubois said with a dismissive shrug. "But a very capable one," Archibald interjected, his eyes never leaving Dubois. He began to talk, his voice a low, confident murmur, weaving a web of lies designed to sow chaos. "Dubois, you should know that Elliot was planning on selling you out. He made a deal with me this afternoon. He gives me you, and he gets a pardon and a new life in the Americas. This whole meeting was a trap, but not for him, for you. It was a complete fabrication, but it was plausible." Elliot sputtered a denial, but Dubois' eyes narrowed, a flicker of doubt appearing. He had built his life on paranoia, and Archibald was playing it like a violin. "Liar," Elliot shrieked, his grip on my arm tightening until I cried out in pain. In that split second, as Dubois' attention was divided, as Elliot was lost in his own panicked rage, Archibald moved. He wasn't an artist anymore. He was a weapon. He launched himself across the room, not at Dubois, but at a heavy iron candelabra on the mantelpiece. With a single fluid motion, he swung it, sending a shower of hot wax and flaming wicks across the room. Dubois flinched, instinctively shielding his eyes from the sudden burst of light and flame. It was all the opening Archibald needed. He lunged, slamming into Elliot with the force of a battering ram. I was thrown clear, stumbling against the wall as the two men crashed to the floor. Archibald's movements were brutally efficient. A sharp blow to Elliot's temple rendered my guardian unconscious. Archibald was back on his feet instantly, turning to face Dubois, who was now aiming his pistol again. But Archibald was inside his guard. He grabbed the Frenchman's wrist, forcing the gun upwards. The pistol fired, the shot deafening in the small room, blasting a hole in the plaster ceiling. The fight was short, vicious, and silent. It was a dance of professional violence. Archibald twisted Dubois' arm, a sharp crack echoing through the room as the bone broke. Dubois screamed, the pistol clattering to the floor. A final, precise strike to the throat, and the French spy collapsed, gagging and incapacitated. Archibald stood over the two fallen men, breathing heavily. He grabbed the leather tube containing my drawing from the table, and then the door burst open. A half-dozen British soldiers in red coats stormed into the room, muskets leveled. They stopped dead, taking in the scene, the two unconscious spies on the floor, me, a terrified girl cowering against the wall, and their commanding officer, Major Thorne, standing there alone, having clearly acted against all orders. A young lieutenant, his face a mask of confusion, lowered his weapon slightly. "Major, what is the meaning of this? Your orders were to wait for the signal." Archibald looked at his subordinate, then at me, and his expression was grim. He knew how this looked. He knew what he had just sacrificed. "The situation," he said, his voice ragged but firm, "is contained." I was escorted from the inn, wrapped in a soldier's coat, my mind a maelstrom of shock and confusion. I was taken not to a prison, but to a comfortable, secure house in a nearby town, where I was left alone in a room with a fire and a cup of tea I couldn't bring myself to drink. The world had tilted on its axis. Everything I had believed to be true, Mr. Elliot's kindness, my own purpose, was a lie. The only solid thing I could cling to was the memory of Archibald's face in the inn, the fierce determination in his eyes as he fought. He had saved me, but why? The next day, an older woman with a kind, weary face came to speak with me. She explained, gently but clearly, the full extent of Mr. Elliot's betrayal. She confirmed that Archibald was who he said he was, and that he had been sent to investigate the espionage ring. He was under strict orders to allow the exchange to happen, she said, her voice soft. That would have meant your arrest, child. You would have been tried as a co-conspirator. Major Thorne defied those orders. He risked his career, and possibly his life, to prevent that. The weight of her words settled on me. He hadn't just saved me from a physical threat in a dangerous room. He had saved me from the gallows. He had saved me from a fate I couldn't even comprehend, a fate that his own side had deemed an acceptable loss. My shock began to curdle into a slow, dawning understanding. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had drawn those beautiful, deadly flowers. I felt a wave of nausea. I had been a puppet, and I hadn't even seen the strings. Later that day, I was allowed to look at my portfolio of drawings, accompanied by a cryptographer who pointed out the hidden meanings. He showed me how the number of petals on a rose corresponded to the number of cannons on a ship, how the delicate cross-hatching on a leaf was actually a map of a coastal fortification. Seeing my art, my only joy, twisted into a tool of betrayal, was the final, devastating blow. The naivete was burned out of me in that room, leaving behind the raw, aching hollowness of truth. I asked the kind woman if I could see Major Thorne. She looked at me with pity. "That's not possible, dear. The Major is indisposed." And Archibald was, in fact, under military arrest. He stood before Colonel Harding in a makeshift office, stripped of his rank insignia. He did not offer excuses or apologies. He simply laid out the facts as he saw them. He presented my entire collection of drawings, from the earliest simple sketches to the final complex coded messages. "Look at the progression, sir," Archibald said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You can see him testing her, teaching her the techniques he needed. Here, he praises her for her precision. Here, he corrects a mistake that was in fact a deviation from the code. This is not the work of a spy. This is the work of a student who desperately wanted to please her teacher. He laid out his psychological assessment of Elliot's manipulation, of my isolation and emotional starvation. He spoke with the cold precision of an intelligence analyst, but his words carried an undeniable conviction. She is innocent, Colonel, not just in law, but in spirit. She is the victim of a monstrous betrayal. I will not be the man who compounds that betrayal by sending her to her death for the sake of a cleaner report. The crown does not need to build its victories on the graves of children. Colonel Harding listened, his face an impassive mask. He was a man of rules and protocols, and Archibald had shattered them all, but he was also a shrewd politician. A public trial of a pretty, innocent young artist, manipulated by her evil guardian, would be a public relations disaster. It would raise uncomfortable questions. Archibald, in his reckless insubordination, had inadvertently handed Harding a more palatable narrative. "You have placed me in an impossible position, Thorne," Harding said finally, his voice like gravel. He was quiet for a long moment. "Richard Elliot and the Frenchman Dubois will be tried for treason. The official report will state that the operation was a success, thanks to the assistance of a brave civilian asset who helped us uncover the plot. Miss March's name will be cleared, and she will be commended for her service to the Crown." Archibald felt a profound wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me," Harding snapped, his eyes flashing with anger. "This is not for you. As for your actions, you defied a direct order in the field. You compromised a major operation and endangered your men. You are a disgrace to the uniform. You will be dishonorably discharged, effective immediately. Consider yourself lucky. I don't have you shot. Now get out of my sight." Archibald simply nodded, turned on his heel, and walked out of the room. His career was over. His name was ruined within the service. He had lost everything he had worked for his entire life. But as he stepped out into the clean, cold air, he felt lighter than he had in years. He had done the right thing. It was as simple and as complicated as that. Months passed, the seasons turned. The scandal of the Willow Creek spies was a brief tremor in the newspapers, a dramatic tale of a brave young lady artist who helped the Crown capture a ring of traitors. My name was celebrated, though I hid from the attention, wanting nothing more than to be left alone. It was discovered that Mr. Elliot had been systematically embezzling my parents' estate. Their true will was found, and I was left a small but comfortable inheritance, including a seaside cottage in a quiet fishing village, a place my mother had loved. I moved there, seeking the solace of the ocean's gray expanse. I was healing, slowly. The naive girl who loved to draw flowers was gone forever, replaced by a quieter, more watchful woman. The betrayal had left a permanent scar on my soul, but it had also forged a new kind of strength within me. I no longer sought anyone's approval. I was learning to stand on my own. I had not heard a word from or about Archibald Thorne. I assumed he had disappeared back into the shadowed world from which he had come. Then, one bright, windswept afternoon, as I was mending a fishing net in my small front garden, a man walked up the path. He was dressed in simple civilian clothes, his face thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were the same, dark, intense, and carrying the weight of 100 secrets. It was Archibald. He stopped a few feet away from me, looking uncertain. "Miss March," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Lydia." "Mr. Thorne," I replied, my heart starting to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I had heard you were no longer a major." He gave a small, wry smile. "Indeed, I am no longer much of anything. We stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the gulls and the crashing waves filling the space between us. "I was sent to use you, Lydia," he confessed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "That was the plan. You were a pawn, a tool to get to the others. That's all I saw you as. That's all I saw anyone as." He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were filled with a raw, painful honesty. I was a man who believed the world was a corrupt, ugly place, and that goodness was an illusion, a weakness to be exploited. And then I met you. You were so genuine. Your kindness, your innocence. It wasn't an act. It was real, and it broke through every wall I had ever built. You were something my cynical world had no place for. You were simply good. Tears welled in my eyes, but I did not let them fall. "And you, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice steady, You saw the truth of me when no one else would have bothered to look. You did not treat me as an acceptable loss. His apology was for his deception, but I understood what he had truly given me. He had given me my life and my freedom. He had treated my innocence not as a flaw, but as something worth protecting, something worth sacrificing for. In a world that had used me, he had chosen to save me. It was a debt I could never repay, a gift of unimaginable worth. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. I am leaving England. I thought I should say goodbye properly. My heart sank. Of course he was leaving. There was nothing left for him here. He had given up everything. He nodded, a gesture of finality, and began to turn away. He was going to walk out of my life, a ghost who had appeared only to vanish again. And in that moment, I made a choice. It was the first decision of my new life, a choice made not from duty or gratitude, but from a quiet, certain feeling in my own heart. Wait, I said. He stopped, turning back to me. Where will you go? He shrugged, a gesture of profound weariness. I don't know, it doesn't much matter. I took a deep breath, the salty air filling my lungs. The thing is, Mr. Thorne, I began, my voice finding a new strength. This cottage has a spare room, and the light here, by the sea, it can be quite remarkable. An artist might find it inspiring. It was not a plea, it was an offer, an invitation into my quiet, rebuilt world, a chance for a new beginning, for both of us. He stared at me, a long, searching look. The hard lines of the spymaster seemed to soften, and for the first time, I saw the man underneath, a man who was lost, and tired, and perhaps just as lonely as I had been. A slow, genuine smile, the first I had ever seen from him, touched his lips. He didn't say yes. He didn't have to. In his eyes, I saw the answer. The future was a blank canvas, uncertain and vast, but for the first time, it was not frightening. It was full of hope.